arrived like a verdict. Britain has attracted the lowest levels of investment of the G7 nations this year in a blow to Sir Keir Starmer's ambitions to boost growth. Investment by the government and businesses in the UK as a percentage of GDP stood at just 18.6% in the 3 months to September, according to the Office for National Statistics. The figure placed the United Kingdom at the very bottom of the G7, below even Germany, a nation currently enduring its longest period of economic stagnation since the Second World War.
Good day to you and welcome back to UK Insider. If there is one national pastime the British people have perfected over the centuries, it is not queuing, nor is it discussing the weather with grim determination. No, our true expertise lies in the art of cynical foresight, the uncanny ability to look at a politician smiling on the television and immediately instinctively clutch our wallets a little tighter. And right now, that collective instinct is screaming louder than a car alarm at 3 in the morning. We are standing on the precipice of what feels like a political earthquake, one that threatens to swallow the Treasury whole. The word on the street and indeed the data on the spreadsheet suggests that the Chancellor, Rachel Reeves, is sitting on a chair with 3 wobbly legs and the Prime Minister, Sir Keir Starmer, might just be holding the saw. The narrative is shifting from give them a chance to get them out, with a speed that would make a Formula One driver dizzy. We are talking about a potential income tax explosion that defies manifesto pledges, a looming recession that half the country can see coming from a mile away, and a political landscape so volatile that nearly a fifth of the population thinks the Conservatives and Reform UK are about to merge into a single right-wing megazord. It is chaotic, it is messy, and frankly, it is exactly the sort of drama we need to unpack. Quick favour, if you are finding yourself nodding along or just enjoying the chaos of British politics being dismantled piece by piece, hit that subscribe button and click the notification bell. Over 92% of you viewing this have not joined the family yet. It is completely free, takes a mere second, and it honestly means the world to us to have you here. Thank you kindly if you did. Now, let us get back to the show. Let us begin with the woman of the hour, or perhaps the woman running out of hours, Rachel Reeves. The mood music emanating from number 11 Downing Street is not exactly a triumphant symphony, it is sounding more like a funeral march played on a kazoo. The latest polling from Ipsos has dropped a bombshell that essentially confirms what everyone has been whispering at dinner parties and groaning about in pub corners. A staggering 63% of the British public believe the government is going to hike income tax this year. Now pause for a moment and consider the weight of that number. 63%, that is not a fringe conspiracy theory, that is a national consensus. And why is this significant? Because the Labour Party manifesto, that sacred text promised to the electorate during the campaign, was explicitly clear. They pledged not to hike rates on working people. They looked down the barrel of the camera and promised that your payslip was safe. Yet here we are, barely settling into the new year, and the public has already decided that pledge is about as durable as a chocolate teapot. The trust is evaporating. When nearly 2/3 of the country expect you to break your core promise, you do not just have a communication problem, you have a credibility crisis of catastrophic proportions. But the anxiety does not stop at taxation, it goes deeper. We are looking at the terrifying spectre of the R word, recession. Half the country, 51% to be precise, expect the United Kingdom to tip into a recession in 2026. Just imagine that for a second. We are not talking about a bit of stagnation or a mild cooling off. We are talking about the economy contracting, businesses shuttering, and the financial engine seizing up. People are bracing themselves. They are not booking holidays. They are stockpiling tinned beans and anxiety. And where does this leave Rachel Reeves? Well, the betting markets, or at least public opinion, are not in her favour. Only 27% of people think Ms Reeves will still be Chancellor by the end of the year. Let that sink in. Nearly 3/4 of the population think she is a dead woman walking politically. That is a brutal assessment. It implies that the public expects Sir Keir Starmer to need a scapegoat, a sacrificial lamb to toss to the wolves when the economic biting point becomes too painful. If the policies are disastrous, if the tax hikes bite, and if the growth fails to materialise, someone has to take the fall. And history tells us that when the Prime Minister's approval ratings start to tank, the Chancellor is usually the first one pushed out of the sleigh to lighten the load. It is a ruthless business, politics. 1 minute you are the Iron Chancellor, the next you are a trivia answer on a daytime quiz show. And speaking of quiz answers, here is a question for you. Do you think inflation will dip below the Bank of England's 2% target? If you said no, you are with the majority. A mere 16% of the public considers it likely. That is a vote of no confidence in the entire economic strategy. The narrative that things are getting better is crashing headfirst into the reality of my shopping bill has doubled. The disconnect between the official line and the public experience is becoming a canyon. While the Treasury issues press releases about stability, the average Briton is looking at their bank balance and weeping. While 35% of optimists, bless their hearts, think their personal financial situation will improve, a grim 48% expect it will not. That is nearly half the country resigning themselves to getting poorer. It is not just pessimism, it is realism born of experience. Now let us pivot to the man at the top, Sir Keir Starmer. You might think that with the Tories in disarray, his position would be unassailable. You would be wrong. The public mood is so volatile that just 43% think it is likely that Sir Keir Starmer will even be in his post at the end of the year. Think about that. Less than half the country is confident the Prime Minister will survive the next 12 months. That is extraordinary for a leader who supposedly has a massive mandate. It suggests a fragility in the Labour government that belies their parliamentary majority. But do not think the opposition is sitting pretty either. The same number, 43%, think Kemi Badenoch will still be leading the Conservatives. It seems the British public has looked at the current crop of political leaders and collectively shrugged, deciding that none of them are particularly sticky. It is a carousel of leadership, and everyone is waiting for the music to stop. This brings us to one of the most fascinating statistics to emerge from this polling. A statistic that sounds like political fan fiction, but might just be the plot twist of the decade. 19% of people think it is probable that the Conservatives and Reform UK will merge into one political party. Just visualise that for a moment. The grand old Conservative Party, the party of Churchill and Thatcher, fusing its DNA with the populist energy of Reform UK. It sounds absurd on paper, but nearly 1 in 5 people can see it happening. Why? Because the right-wing vote is fractured. The Tories are bleeding support to Reform, and Reform is snapping at their heels. If they continue to split the vote, they hand power to Labour indefinitely. The logic of a merger, or at least a non-aggression pact, becomes seductive. It would be a political Frankenstein's monster, certainly, but it might be the only way for the right to claw its way back to power. The fact that the public is even entertaining this possibility shows just how fluid and unpredictable our political landscape has become. Everything is on the table. Now, let us talk about the Europeans. Remember them? Despite all the noise, despite the recent pushes for a much closer relationship between the United Kingdom and the European Union, the public is not buying the idea of a grand reunion. Only 18% think the country will rejoin the single market. That is a clear signal. For all the talk of resetting relations, the British people understand that rejoining the single market would be a breach of the Labour manifesto so flagrant it could cause a riot. The scars of the Brexit wars are still fresh, and while people want trade to flow, they are sceptical about reopening the constitutional wound that divided the country for half a decade. So how are people feeling about 2026 generally? Is there a sense of hope, a new year, new me optimism? Not really. When asked whether 2026 will be better for them than last year, only 27% thought it would be. 31% expect it to be worse. We are a nation of realists, bordering on pessimists. Interestingly, the gloom is distributed quite unevenly across the political spectrum. Among Reform voters who tend to be the most disillusioned with the status quo, only 18% expected this year to be better. In contrast, 34% of Labour voters and 23% of those who backed the Tories held on to some shred of hope. It seems that your political allegiance is now a predictor of your economic optimism or lack thereof. This gloom is not unfounded. It is backed up by the experts, the people who spend their days staring at graphs and drinking far too much coffee. Kate Shoesmith, the British Chamber of Commerce's Director of Policy, has come out with a forecast that is about as exciting as watching paint dry in a damp room. She predicts the economy will expand in 2026, which sounds good until you hear the number, by just 1.2%. 1.2%, that is not growth, that is a rounding error. As Shoesmith rightly points out, this continues a trend of meagre growth that dates back to the financial crash of 2008. We have been stuck in the slow lane for nearly 2 decades. The economy is like an old diesel engine on a cold morning. It is coughing, spluttering, and struggling to turn over. She used a fantastic analogy. The economy remains stuck in first gear. We are revving the engine, making a lot of noise, burning a lot of fuel, but we are barely moving forward. And if you have ever driven a car stuck in first gear on a motorway, you know it is not a sustainable way to travel. Eventually, something blows up. And what is the biggest concern for the people actually trying to run businesses in this country? Is it Brexit? Is it AI? No, it is tax. The British Chamber of Commerce research shows that tax rises remain the biggest nightmare for firms. Despite the Chancellor's recent budget, which was supposedly designed to allay those fears, businesses are terrified. They are looking at the bottom line and seeing the government's hand reaching deeper into their pockets. Ms. Shoesmith also warned about labour and energy costs increasing inflationary pressures. That is economist speak for everything is going to get more expensive. And because of that, only modest interest rate cuts are likely. So if you were hoping for your mortgage payments to drop off a cliff, you might want to adjust your expectations. The Bank of England is not going to slash rates if inflation is threatening to spike again. We are in a bind. We need growth, but we are terrified of inflation. We need tax revenue, but we are taxing businesses into the ground. It is a catch-22 wrapped in an enigma and deep-fried in confusion. The proposed solution, Shoesmith suggests maximising the AI rollout and global trading opportunities to help break the deadlock. It sounds lovely, doesn't it? Just sprinkle a little artificial intelligence on the economy and watch it grow. But as anyone who has tried to get a chatbot to answer a simple customer service query knows, AI is not a magic wand. It is a tool, and we are still figuring out how to use it without accidentally deleting the entire workforce. Of course, the opposition is having a field day with this. Richard Fuller, the Shadow Chief Secretary to the Treasury, has jumped in with both feet. He warned that the Labour government's constant attacks on people who work hard are discouraging the efforts needed to get the economy back on track. It is the classic Conservative line, Labour punishes success. He claims that only the Conservatives have a plan to cut £47 billion from wasteful public spending and welfare. £47 billion, that is a colossal number. It is the kind of number you throw around when you are in opposition and do not actually have to implement the cuts. Fuller talks about introducing targeted tax cuts to reinforce the spirit of enterprise. It is a nostalgic vision, harking back to the days when tax cuts were seen as the cure for all ills. But whether the public believes the Conservatives are the party of fiscal responsibility after the chaos of the last few years is another matter entirely. The memory of the mini-budget still lingers like a bad smell. However, the Treasury is not taking this lying down. They have fired back with a statement that is so optimistic it borders on gaslighting. A Treasury spokesperson said, "Since the election, real wages have risen more than the first 10 years of the previous government." They claim to have defied expectations on growth, citing upgrades from the OBR, the Bank of England, the IMF, the OECD and the BCC. They are rattling off acronyms like a machine gun, hoping that if they list enough international bodies, you will forget that your heating bill has gone up. They point to raising the national living and minimum wages, taking £150 off energy bills, freezing prescription fees, and wait for it, freezing rail fares for the first time in 30 years. They frame this as driving growth through billions in new capital spending. It is a classic battle of narratives. On one side, you have the Treasury saying, look at the data, look at the wage growth, look at the rail fares. On the other side, you have the British public saying, look at my empty wallet, look at the price of butter, look at the tax hike I know is coming. Who is winning this battle? Well, if the polling is anything to go by, the Treasury is losing badly. The perception is that Rachel Reeves is out of her depth, that Starmer is drifting, and that the economy is heading for the rocks. This is why the rumour mill is spinning about Reeves being sacked. If the recession hits in 2026, as 51% of people expect, Starmer cannot simply say, well, we tried. He will need to act. He will need to show he is doing something. And the easiest way to show you are doing something is to fire the person in charge of the money. Imagine the scene. It is late 2026. The economy has contracted for 2 quarters in a row. The headlines are screaming recession. The backbenchers are restless. Starmer calls Reeves into his office. It is the classic political betrayal. It's not you, Rachel, it's the markets. She exits via the back door and a new chancellor is installed to steady the ship. It is a tale as old as Westminster itself. The tragedy is that it solves nothing fundamental, but it buys the Prime Minister another 6 months of survival. And what of the merger idea? The Conservatives and Reform blending into one. It brings to mind an image of Nigel Farage and Kemi Badenoch trying to share a podium without elbowing each other off the edge. But stranger things have happened. If the right unites, Labour's dominance could evaporate overnight. Starmer knows this. His strategists know this. That is why they are so desperate to deliver growth now. They need to prove that their way works before the opposition gets its act together. But first gear growth is not going to cut it. 1.2% is not going to make people feel wealthier. It is barely enough to keep the lights on. The danger for Labour is that they become defined by stagnation. They came in promising change, but if the change feels like simply managing the decline more politely than the other lot, the voters will turn ferocious. We are seeing a public that is tired of promises, tired of taxes, tired of the constant crisis mode. They want competence, yes, but they also want relief. They want to feel that the system is not rigged against them. When 63% of people expect a tax hike despite a promise not to do it, that tells you the social contract is fraying. People expect to be lied to. That is a dangerous place for a democracy to be. The next 12 months are going to be critical. It is make or break for Rachel Reeves. She has to pull a rabbit out of a hat, but the hat is on fire and the rabbit has run off to join a union. She needs to find money where there is none, stimulate growth without sparking inflation, and keep the public on side while picking their pockets. It is a task that would make a magician weep. If she fails, the explosion will not just be metaphorical, it will be political. The Keir-Starmer project relies on economic competence. If that pillar collapses, the whole roof comes down. And waiting in the wings are the sharks, the mergers, the leadership challengers, and a public that has run out of patience. So buckle up. The road to 2026 is paved with good intentions and massive potholes. The Treasury is under siege, the Prime Minister is on shaky ground, and the voters are watching with arms crossed and brows furrowed. It is going to be a bumpy ride, and we will be here to cover every twist, turn, and inevitable U-turn. Thank you very much for watching. We shall see you in the next one.